Let me begin by addressing some breaking news. A terrible earthquake has hit parts of Southeast Asia today. And we send our condolences to the governments and peoples of the region. The United Nations system is mobilizing to help those in need. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, I want to focus today on the dramatic and dire situation that is unfolding in South Sudan. All the dark clouds of a perfect storm have descended upon the people of the world's newest country and one of the poorest. A security emergency with intensifying clashes, aerial bombing of civilians, including women and children, the presence of external forces, and an ever-growing regional dimension to the conflict. Political upheaval, culminating most recently with the arrest of First Vice President Riek Machar. The peace agreement is in shambles. A humanitarian nightmare, with about 3 out of 4 South Sudanese needing assistance, half the population severely food insecure, and cholera breaking out. A displacement crisis, with more than 1 million people crossing the border from Sudan since fighting began there. And an economic meltdown, with oil revenue plummeting and inflation skyrocketing 300%. Finally, a funding crisis, with much of the already limited humanitarian and development aid drying up. Meanwhile, ethnic and political targeting by security forces, coupled with the spread of misinformation on social media, is lighting the fuse for even worse. Let's not mince words. What we are seeing is darkly reminiscent of the 2013 and 2016 civil wars, which killed 400,000 people. Our UN mission in South Sudan is working around the clock to ease tensions, engaging all parties, and boosting protection of civilians. But we face operational limitations. For the sake of the long-suffering people of South Sudan, it's time for dialogue and de-escalation. The Horn of Africa is already in turmoil and cannot afford another conflict, nor can the people of South Sudan. To the leaders of that country, I say, end the politics of confrontation. Release detained military and civilian officials now. Fully restore the government of national unity and vigorously implement the promises you made through your commitments to the peace agreement, which is the only legal framework to peaceful, free and fair elections in December 2026. I also urge the regional and international community as guarantors of the peace agreement to speak with one voice in support of the peace process and against any attempts to undermine it. I just spoke with the chairperson of the African Union Commission this morning. We fully support the AU initiative to deploy the panel of the wise, as well as the efforts of Special Envoy of President Ruto of Kenya. And we'll be working in close cooperation with the AU and the IGAD. The people of South Sudan are close to my heart. On my very first visit as High Commissioner for Refugees, I was several days with South Sudanese refugees, and years later, I accompanied them across the border, finally on their way home. And I will never forget the decency at their very core. They had such enormous hopes and aspirations, but unfortunately, not the leadership they deserve. At this critical hour, the people of South Sudan need an infusion of support, diplomatic and political support for peace, and financial support for life-saving aid. South Sudan may have fallen off the world's radar, but we cannot let the situation fall over the abyss. Now more than ever, the leaders of South Sudan must hear a clear, unified, and resounding message. Put down the weapons. Put all the people of South Sudan first. Thank you. Thank you. Edith?
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General. First, you said that the United Nations is mobilizing to help victims of the earthquake in Myanmar and elsewhere in Southeast Asia. Can you give us some details on what the UN is doing in the region? And on South Sudan, have efforts been made or are efforts being made to talk to both Salva Kiir and to try and get to Riek Machar?
First of all, the government of Myanmar has asked for international support, and our team in Myanmar is already in contact in order to fully mobilize our resources in the region to support the people of Myanmar. But of course, there are other countries impacted, but the epicenter is in Myanmar, and Myanmar is the weakest country in this present situation. The panel of the wise will and Raila Odinga will visit both Salva Kiir and Riek Machar. We are in very close contact with the African Union and with the IGAD in order to make sure that those visits produce the effect we want. And the effect we want is the reestablishment of the peace agreement and the creation of conditions for peace in South Sudan.
Just a quick follow-up. Does the UN actually have a team in Myanmar that's actively working on this?
Yes.
Michelle?
Thank you, Secretary General. I wanted to ask you about Ukraine. Last night, President Putin made a suggestion that there could be a temporary administration introduced in Ukraine under the auspices of the UN and others. Could we get your reaction to that? And has the United States been in touch with the United Nations regarding its attempts to broker a Black Sea ceasefire?
First of all, the Ukraine has a legitimate government, and so obviously that must be respected. Second, we have had some contacts with the US. Rebecca Greenspan has had some contacts, but the UN for the moment is not part of the negotiation.
Thank you. Benny?
Mr. Secretary General, do you have any comment on the events today on the border between Israel and Lebanon?
Lebanon, Israel.
Our position has been very clear. We have always appealed for the ceasefire to be fully respected. We have always appealed for Israel to leave the posts it still has in Lebanon and respect the territorial integrity of Lebanon. And we have always appealed for the support of the international community to the government of Lebanon and to the Lebanese armed forces in order for them to fully guarantee the sovereignty of the country.
Thank you very much.
And the security of Israel.
Thank you.